Hello, this is going to be a co-op video. I mentioned before I wasn't going to do a co-op video for a while, and I'm just gonna talk about it, basically. I'm gonna wait to do a really fancy co-op video until Wags does his co-op video, because he might mention some things I did not know. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So, first of all, why is there even a co-op mode? Well, with the IRST and the radar, the engineers foresaw that it might be good to have a mode where the IRST and the radar work together to make the radar more countermeasure resistant, so that, you know, fewer things can break your sensor lock. And it might be helpful to turn this on and off. So that's basically why we have that. Now, one other thing before I go into it. I'm gonna mention radar modes and IRST modes. I don't mean the sensor that is shown on your HUD. I don't mean that. What I mean by IRST or radar mode is what my knob has selected. Is the radar selected? Or are one of these IRST modes selected? These 4 IRST modes. Alrighty. And let's just mention sort of the basic operating principle of co-op. The basic operating principle of co-op is that you have a primary and a secondary sensor. The primary, or the leading sensor, is what is shown on the HUD right now. It's what I have a lock in. And as soon as that lock breaks, then it changes place with the secondary sensor. The secondary sensor now becomes the primary because it has a good lock. And the primary sensor becomes the secondary. And then once that new primary sensor breaks lock, then it'll change place with the secondary sensor again. Alright, so let's go and do what happens with radar mode. Alright, so radar mode. Alright, he's jinking, turn on my co-op mode. Yep, switches to IRST. And FYI, when it switches to IRST lock here, you can no longer fire your Fox 1, which is kind of a big limit. You want to make sure that you fire your Fox 1 while you have the chance. Alright, then let's just go over the other limits we have in radar mode. So, your pursuit mode, when you turn on co-op, it forces your radar into pursuit mode. It won't change radar scale, so I have the head-on mode here, turn co-op on and off. It does not change the scale, but when my co-op mode is on, the radar is acting like it is in the pursuit mode. And the pursuit mode has a range limit of 20 to 35 kilometers depending on altitude. Around 20 kilometers at super low altitude, and 35 to maybe even 40 kilometers higher up. And it has a head-on speed limit of 1100 kilometers per hour. So if they're coming at you head-on, supersonic, and you turn on the co-op mode, I hope you're within IRST lock range so the IRST can pick up the lock, because the radar won't. Now, what are we going to do about this for fast, semi-active radar homing targets? Well, the only time that your head-on lock really breaks is when they notch you or go cold. So, basically what you want to do is turn on co-op mode when their aspect goes to about 60 degrees or more to the side. The more of an aspect they're at, the higher this speed limit. And when they're at a 60 degree aspect, the speed limit isn't 1100 kilometers per hour. It's 2200 kilometers per hour. So just to wait until they're almost notching you, basically, and to turn on that co-op mode, and within 20 to 35 kilometers, and you will be good. Whether they go cold or notch you, well, as long as the IRST can lock them, that is. And this applies to every single mode that I'm going to talk about. The radar is going to be in pursuit mode and not able to lock onto a head-on target over 1100 kilometers per hour, or a target more than 20 to 35 kilometers away. It's going to be true for all the modes. Alright, now I am going to talk about co-op mode for all of the IRST modes. So basically with radar, the only thing you need to do to turn on co-op mode is have that switch forward. But for our 4 IRST modes, it's different. We have 2 switch conditions. You need to have co-op forward, and you need to have this radar emission control switch or illumination switch in the middle EKV or dummy position. And I know this is confusing to a lot of people, but that is just how it is for these IRST modes. You need to have that switch in that middle position. And I know a lot of people are like, but isn't it a testing mode? Isn't it something that you just turn on so that the radar can be on without transmitting? Well, here's a way to think about it. Think about it as putting it in the middle position as like handing over the radar to an auxiliary circuit. You're basically handing it over so that the IRST can control your radar. And I mention this because this will be exactly the same once we get Lazur GCI. Once we get Lazur GCI, you will also need to have this radar switch in the middle dummy / EKV position so that the Lazur can automatically turn on the radar at 60 or 100 kilometers range. And then you can turn it on manually by putting the switch in the top position. But yeah, so for radar mode, we just need this co-op switch forward. But for our 4 IRST modes here, we need co-op forward and that switch in the middle position. So IRST mode, radar mode, and IRST mode by putting the switch in the middle position. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's go through what happens in IRST search mode. And just to be absolutely clear, when I say IRST search, I mean this mode. I mean this mode, 1 spot clockwise to the right, a radar mode, because it gives you an IRST search display. And in the IRST modes, co-op, and in IRST modes, the co-op only takes effect once you lock. So don't worry about the search phase at all. I turn down my gain all the way so it's easier to see the target. Lock them. Now, the co-op switch in this mode, IRST search, enables a 25 kilometer range scale. I turn the co-op off there and you'll see 25 kilometers goes away. Turn on co-op, 25 kilometer range scale. And then with the co-op switch forward and your radar illumination switch in the middle dummy position, we get radar range finding. And of course, this is up to the range limit of the radar. So if we're at low altitude and whatnot, it might not be able to range up to 25 kilometers. And if the range is beyond 25 kilometers, we won't know their exact range, just that they're beyond 25 kilometers. And you can see this little light turn on every 3 seconds whenever the radar pulses. And you'll notice that it does not take closure into account. It just moves and marks the distance every 3 seconds. So, that's awesome. We're not limited by the laser rangefinder. However, there is 2 things that this transitions to. Basically, as it is right now, if my IRST was to lose lock, the radar would not be able to pick it up. It is only doing range finding. It is not able to pick up a lost IRST lock. In order for my radar to fully lock on and fully be able to pick up a lost IRST lock, one of 2 things has to happen. Once they get within laser range, 6.5 kilometers, the radar will then lock. I think basically the logic is that if the laser can range find, the radar doesn't need to range find. And if the radar doesn't need to range find, then it can lock to pick up a lost IRST lock. However, I can force this radar lock on beyond the laser range by pressing the lock button a second time. And this also forces your radar to be the primary sensor, which means you can fire Fox 1s. Alright, so here we go. IRST search mode, lock, switch to dummy, co-op forward. Now we got our range finding. It's giving them a search signal. And, oh, let me turn that on. And press lock button a second time. Radar lock switches to radar primary. Now I can fire a Fox 1. Now the radar and the IRST can pick up each other's dropped locks for better lock security. And I have an aspect arrow. Yay! And then the other condition, I have a IRST co-op lock. It's radar range finding. And then as soon as I get within 6.5 kilometers, or laser range, the radar will lock on and switch to radar primary. Just right there. And those are your 2 conditions for locking on the radar in IRST search co-op mode. And there's also one other thing I want to mention. So I'm in range finding right here. Let me change my weapon to Fox 2. So of course, with IRST as leading sensor, you can't fire Fox 1s. You can only fire Fox 2s. And with the Fox 2 selected, with radar range finding mode in IRST search, I get a Fox 2 DLZ. However, this is not a very accurate DLZ. It is an estimate. kind of based on maximum range. And here's the real kicker. It's based on this switch, the TWF switch. Basically, think of this switch as two modes. Basically, if I'm in radar mode, the TWF switch enables track while flyby or track while scan. However, if we're not in radar mode, but IRST mode, and we're either doing radar range finding or we use K-mod to find range, then we get this estimated Fox2 range marker that changes based on this switch. So you'll notice it says front hemisphere in the top and rear hemisphere on the bottom. So if I move the switch, you will see the DLZ change. And switch to Fox 2. And there you go. You'll see it says 6 kilometers. And my switch is in the rear aspect position. Now if I move the switch to the front aspect, you'll see it shows me 15 kilometers range now. And right now, I am actually in the rear aspect. So, let's say I turn on radar by pressing lock button a second time. 6 kilometers was pretty accurate. Actually, maybe a little conservative. So that was pretty good, as long as I had that switch in the right spot. Let me go to IRST vertical scan and back to search to turn radar back to range finding. Because if I had fired it 15 kilometers away, obviously, you know, it wouldn't have hit. So that's, and by pressing the lock button, I can change to radar leading and get a more accurate DLZ that way. And be able to fire my Fox 1 missile. Now, you can't make it turn the radar back off to go back to range finding. You can't. But there is kind of a hack to make it go back to radar range finding. Because right now, I'm giving their RWR lock signal. Whereas when the radar was just range finding, it was only giving them a search signal on RWR. So here's what you do. If I switch to a different IRST mode, like vertical scan, and switch back to IRST search, then my radar is now back off in normal range finding mode. And I'm only giving them a search signal on RWR. So that's how you can switch between radar primary or not. IRST search mode, co-op forward, this switch in the middle dummy position, and hold lock button to force radar. I see my more exact DLZ here. I got the aspect arrow, and I can fire Fox 1s. And then I go back to radar range finding. I just change mode to vertical scan and back to IRST search. And the DLZ, I'm actually surprised how close it is. Yeah, it's actually not bad. So that's basically it for IRST search co-op mode. We get the radar range finding every 3 seconds beyond laser range. And once it enters laser range or we press lock button second time, it forces the radar as leading. And we have an estimated Fox 2 range that depends on the track while flyby switch. Either it's in front hemisphere or rear hemisphere. Let's try and lock radar again. There we go. For our more exact DLZ and aspect arrow. There we go. Now, let's move on to IRST vertical scan, or BB. This one's really simple. The radar is completely in the background. It will lock as soon as your IRST locks. And as long as you're within 10 kilometers, because we're in a close combat modes only work within 10 kilometers. So as long as you're within 10 kilometers, the radar can lock. If you're outside 10 kilometers, only your IRST might lock and not the radar, until you get within 10 kilometers. And that's basically it. It will switch as needed, like you see right here, and that's all there is to it. Alright, and finally, the opt and helmet modes. Now, the opt and helmet modes work identically. Basically, this is how they both work. When you press lock button with opt or helmet, both the radar and IRST will try to lock at the same time. Right there, my IRST locks because I was beyond 10 kilometers and the radar is in close combat mode, so the radar cannot lock beyond 10 kilometers range. And basically, the first sensor to lock becomes your primary. So IRST locked first, so that's my primary. And if I lock them too far to the side for IRST, it'll lock radar. So with the helmet or opt co-op mode, first sensor to lock becomes primary. But anyways, yeah, so with the helmet mode, it just tries to lock both at the same time, and the first one to lock wins. And that's basically it. So with the radar mode, pretty simple. Just switch a sensor when one loses lock. IRST search, we have the ranging and radar lock on within laser range or forced by second lock button press. Vertical scan, radar just works in the background. And for opt-it and helmet, both sensors lock at the same time, and first one to lock becomes primary. And that's pretty much it for co-op. You're just gonna have to juggle that illumination switch and the co-op switch. These two guys here. And make sure that you're in the correct switch for the mode. And there we go. God damn it. Alright. See you next time. And yep, I forgot to mention IFF. So there is no IFF in the IRST co-op modes. So the only way to IFF is to be in radar mode and see if they show up on either your search display, or if you lock them, you can get an IFF that way, and then even switch to an IRST mode if you want to do like a stealth approach sort of thing. And you can't switch back to radar from IRST mode. Even if I go to like you know, co-op, try to lock radar, and I go back to radar mode, it's just gonna drop lock. But we can go from radar to IRST mode. And yeah, so you'll have to IFF either with that radar lock, seeing them on the radar scope, or just being aware with EWR and everything. So IFF. So, like right here, you can see that once I lock, and there was a friendly IFF on the search screen, and I have a friendly IFF here, as you can see with the C. Since I have co-op mode on, I can switch to IRST mode, and if I then put my switch into dummy and press lock again, I get radar lock again, but no IFF. So, just FYI, you won't get that in co-op IRST modes. And then one last thing. When you are using IRST co-op modes, we have to switch that radar emission switch to dummy. But if you're going to go back and use the radar, you're going to have to switch that switch back into the illume position for the radar to work. Otherwise, if we move that switch into the middle position, we don't have the radar symbol here. So that's a way to kind of know without having to look at the switch, whether that symbol is on or not. So don't be like me and use co-op for the first time and keep forgetting to turn your radar on. Alright, and one of my favorite strats here. Gonna wait to turn on co-op mode until he's pointing to the side a bit to get past the speed limit. Alright, co-op on. Lock brakes. Alright, here, go to IRST mode, turn on, switch to dummy so that the co-op is on, press lock a second time to force radar on, and as soon as he's out of the notch, the co-op, it'll force the radar back on. So I'm kind of just spamming the lock button until he's out of that freaking notch. There we go. Ha ha ha.